So there's this big difference that is often overlooked. If you're improvising using a pentatonic, you can use this scale over a bunch of chords. But if you aim for playing like bebop lines, if you want to improvise over a jazz standard and you want to sound it more like jazzy, you have to play lines that reflect the chord progression. And that's where the overwhelm starts, right? How can you learn all those chords and scales? And it's really a lot. So today we're only going to focus on 3 chord types. So let's start with the major 7 chord. I'm going to record like a C major 7 chord on my freezer. Every chord has a scale that it belongs to. Some chords also stem from different scales, but for today, each chord has only one scale. And so how's the C major chord connected to the C major scale? Basically, you take the scale and only play every second note. And like this, you're stacking thirds. And the first 4 notes that you're stacking are the most important notes of this chord. The C, the E, the G, and the B. And then the rest of the note, the D, the F, and the A, are our color notes. Those are the notes that we can add to the chord, but we don't have to play them. And there's also an avoid note in this scale, that's the F. The F is very close to the E. The E is our major third. And it sort of acts like a suspension. It wants to go here. But for the moment, we're just going to ignore it because our first aim is to play super clear lines, and every note that sort of can obscure a line we're going to leave out of our sound. And now I'm just playing the first 4 notes that we stacked, the 1, 3, 5 and 7. And that's what we call an arpeggio, right? I'm still thinking in this same box. Everything that I play comes from this C major pattern, if you want so, but I'm picking notes, right? When I'm playing those notes of a chord, I can play a line that already demonstrate the character of the chord. So sort of I'm going to improvise using a C major arpeggio and an E flat major arpeggio up here. The same arpeggio, right? I'm just shifting the shape so I don't have to search for the notes. But since I know the E flat major arpeggio also in this place on the neck, I'm going to try to improvise in one part of the fretboard because it's more organic, right? But when you start, it's completely cool to just shift things around so that you can clearly hear what you're doing. But later on, I would urge you to try to play in one position as an exercise, right? So that the fretboard doesn't dictate where you play your lines. So I'm going to just play a line and then I'm going to play the chords over it afterwards just to hear if my line reflects the chord. So I'm recording my line on the looper and then I'm playing the chords on top of it. Also, I'm forcing myself to play consecutive 8 notes because in this way I can't play any licks and I have just to hear where my line goes, but I'm giving myself the freedom to play a little faster or slower if I don't find the next note. 7 chord can be a tonic. That means it can be a point in a chord progression where it's sort of peaceful, where a line rests, where a line ends, and it's a very good idea to practice playing clear tonics. If you listen to the great improvisers, they're very good at playing clear major tonics. Very often they only play a triad like C, E, G. I know this doesn't sound like much of a bebop line now, but we're just building sort of our foundation, a solid foundation. So let's have a look at another very important chord, the dominant 7th chord. You'll find it everywhere when you play jazz. And the good news, it's only one note that changes from the C major 7 to the C7. And then, of course, which scale belongs to this chord, right? So we still can play the C major scale, sort of. We're just changing the B to the B flat. Let's do that. So this is kind of interesting. We're having a sort of a scale with a B flat, the rest of the notes stays the same. We can ask ourselves which major scale has one flat, right? The B flat. It's F major, right? So we're basically playing the notes of a F major scale. And I want to demonstrate a very important fact now, right? Because the scales that you're playing don't always sound like the scales that you think that you're playing, because you always have to pay attention to your surroundings, which note is the bass player playing, and also which chord is being played. So I recorded a C7 chord on my looper. Now I'm shifting this whole position that we used up to here, because we just figured out, right, we're playing an F major scale basically. But let's hear how it sounds, right? This is the F. It doesn't sound like a root, right? But what sounds like a root is the C, of course. Basically, I'm playing an F major scale, but I have a C7 chord on my looper, and then the C on the looper dictates that the C would also be the root now in my scale and not the F anymore. And this changes everything around quite a bit. It's always a very good idea to play a scale on one string because it makes matters very clearly. So if we play a C major scale on one string, we can also play this new scale that we now found with the B flat on one string. And that's C mixolydian, right? And now let's do the same thing that we did with the C major scale. Let's find the arpeggio of the chord that we just played. Same pattern, different arpeggio, different sound. And there's also an avoid note. It's the F that would be on the 4th degree. And it's also very close to the E of the C7 chord, right? Because 1, 3, 5, 7, again, very important. And this F sort of obscures its quality, its major quality a little bit. So for the moment, we're just trying to leave this note out in our improvisations. But also if we're having like a C7, and I said, like, you can stack up all the thirds for the color notes, also going to leave out the F, but we'll still have the D and the A, right? The D and the A. So this is a pretty dissonant, not very stable chord, and it wants to resolve somewhere, and it wants to resolve to a tonic chord. So those two types of chords, the major 7 and the dominant 7th chord, are super, super important. And we can build a 5-1 progression with it. The 1 would be our C major 7, and the 5 from the root up would be the G7. So we would have to transpose what we just found out here, right? We're still having this pattern up here with a C7, just moving it down here. And then we'll back in the same pattern, because G7 of course is a part of the C major scale, and I guess you already know that, but I just wanted to make it so clear that those are two different types of chords that need different treatment, right? Because if you're playing the C major scale over the G7 and the C major, of course that works, but if you don't choose your notes carefully, it will never sound like a 5-1 in a line, you know, because that's our goal, is to play a line that would reflect a 5-1 progression. And one way how you can do that without going completely nuts and thinking about each and every note is by playing arpeggios. So we found this C7 arpeggio, which is the G7 here. And I'm just going to improvise using the G7 and the C major 7 arpeggio. In this position, all the notes in this pattern, but it's going to sound like a 5-1. Let's do it. I want to play chromatic stuff all the time, but we'll get to that later, right? And so then we have one last chord type, which is also very famous. It's the C minor 7 chord. You can do the same trick we just did. Only one note changes. The E goes to the E flat. So now we have two flats, the E flat and the B flat. We can ask ourselves again, which key does have two flats, right? It's the B flat scale. So let's play B flat, still using the same pattern. And now we're going to check out the C minor 7 arpeggio in this pattern. This is so important. I'm playing still the same pattern for the third time now, but I recorded a different chord. I recorded a C minor 7 chord, and our new root is a C now because the chord dictates it. So I'm going to play the B flat major scale. Right, everybody can hear how it resolves. So I'm assuming this is my root. I'm playing the chord now. Doesn't feel the same way, does it? Because our new root is the C. Here is home. Can you hear it? And the arpeggio. And so if we go back to a 5-1 in C major, we can add, of course, the 2 chord, which would be the D minor 7, right? Then we have our 2-5-1. So just shifting the same pattern in the same position that we started with, we're having a D minor 7 chord. And this chord has an avoid note too, it's the B. So it's not such a good idea if you're not playing like modal jazz to play a B on the D minor 7, because the next chord is the G7. The most important note on the G7 is the B, the third. If we're playing the third already on the D minor 7, we're giving away our guide tones where it's going to, right? Because everything is more like wants to resolve to the next chord, to the next tone. So just for today, we're going to improvise using only arpeggios. D minor 7, G7, C major. So this is just so great, right? Depending on the chord that you're recording, your scale sounds different. And remember, when you're improvising over a blues, right, and you're using, let's say, the C minor pentatonic on a C blues, I'm sure you already felt and heard that the sound changes from the chords that are being played behind you, right? I also have a Patreon channel. If you're a Patreon, thank you so much for supporting me. It really means a lot. There's a weekly video as well. At the moment I'm discussing gear a little bit, volume pedals, but also a lot of tunes. And yes, check it out and I'll see you next week. Bye.